What's going on, Haley?
Hello.
Super glad to have you. Super excited for this episode of the God is Awesome podcast. If anyone is listening out there, thank you for streaming us on your device. And you could find us on all the major places where you could download podcasts. This is the God is Awesome podcast where we interview everyday regular Christians about an awesome and not everyday God, an eternal God rather, and how he's changed their lives and just held them through like all kinds of crazy nonsense that this world and its depravity has to offer. If you don't know, my name is Aaron. I will be your host for this episode, and we have on the line my good friend KaileeKiwi Clark. Kailee,
Hello. Oh my God. I'm so excited.
I'm excited too. I just want to let anyone know out there, if you, really feel this podcast, if you feel like someone would benefit from it or someone might resonate, have a similar story, we're trying to build a community here. And I'm sure Kailee would not object to you saying what's up, saying hi to these people. Maybe I know she's very wise. Honestly, she's one of the most God-fearing and genuine people. And I feel like she wouldn't mind unless she reverts into her introverted self, not talking to some people here online. But yeah, so be sure to share this podcast and get connected with Kailee if you feel led to. Anyway, Kailee, I'm going to kick it over to you.
Oh, okay.
Tell us a little bit about yourself, origin story, where you're coming from, how you grew up, and how that all led to Christ.
Oh, wow. Well, first, my name is Kailee. And as far as where I came from, I grew up in Florida. I still live in Florida. I grew up in a little small town in Fort Pierce, Florida.
Hmm.
And my parents, kind of, I guess my story of growing up, I grew up in the church. I grew up in the same church that my parents got married in. I went there for 22 years of my life.
Wow,
2 years
long
of my life.
time.
So I went through, high school, middle school, elementary, grew up in the nursery,
Oh,
grew up on Veggie Tales, grew
church
up
girl.
all of the, oh yeah,
Yeah.
all of that.
VBS. You got the
VBS.
little badges, Awanas.
Oh gosh. I didn't do Awana. I did do what is it? I did do Missionettes. So that was fun.
Missionettes. I've never heard of that one. Okay.
Yeah, it's basically like
The,
Christian
the,
Girl Scouts. I don't know.
is that the Bible version?
I don't know.
I'm sorry. It's probably a great ministry. I'm just joking. Okay. So cool.
Yeah, so I did that for a while, and I remember saying the salvation prayer when I was about 6 years old. And I think my earliest memory that I had of really anything Christian based was my dad reading me Bible stories when I was a kid.
Oh.
I remember like thinking back to it, I realized like they were stories from the Old Testament, so they were like I did not understand at all what was going on.
Yeah. And
like,
they all died, and
yeah.
David cut his head off. And
all this crazy
good
stuff.
night, sweetie. Good night.
Yeah.
I love you.
I just look back and I'm like, he was doing the best he could with what he needed to do. Like, it was okay. So,
And she seduced her stepfather into sleeping with him.
and all of the animals loaded up on the ark, and everyone else
And
died.
death
Yeah.
to everyone in the world. Okay. Isn't that funny? That's like the Old Testament, not to be joked with.
No, it's not. I look back on it, I was like, why are we painting pictures about
No,
this?
yeah, that's some Game of Thrones type of stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was crazy. So I remember like kind of going through that with my dad. As a kid, and my parents, my mom and my dad taking me to church on Sundays, kind of like fill in the gap a little bit about what happened.
Sure.
But I remember at like 6 years old, that was kind of the first time that I had been introduced to the concept of Jesus and understanding like, okay, getting saved and, doing this thing and saying this prayer is the right thing to do. Like, this is just the next step in, being part of my family, really.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that's kind of where I came from. And
So you were saved early on. You were saved early on, and then you kind of just lived the churchy life, right?
yeah.
Did you ever rebel or anything?
Um, I mean, in my own way, I guess I did,
Yeah.
but it was kind of more of just, I didn't really understand. I didn't understand the weight of the gospel or really anything like that until I was probably about 20, 22 years old.
Ah, okay. What do you mean by weight of the gospel?
So I really didn't understand, like, I probably should back up a little bit, but when I was about 13, right, I went through the whole teenager thing. I did the whole, liking boys and trying to impress boys and trying to get boys to like me and all of that stuff.
Sure. Sure.
I realized at that time that
Attention.
was, yes,
Yeah.
all of the attention. Um, and I realized, like looking back, that was when I started going to youth group, and that was when I started kind of being more around kids my own age and the whole teenage drama. And that was really the time in my life when I got probably into the most trouble as a kid.
Okay.
Because I was a little brat when I was
Yeah.
13. I
Yeah.
was. And I, you know, I had kind of, I don't know, I was just going through like the whole hormonal puberty
Sure.
type deal.
Sure.
And
Part
that
puberty,
was,
part depravity. That's
it,
maybe puberty is a result of depravity. I'm not even sure. The
I don't
fallen
know.
world.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Either way, I was a little sinner when I was 13.
Sure. We were over.
Still am to this day. But
Right.
so around that time was when I started kind of, I guess, understanding more things and understanding more things about the Bible and understanding more about the gospel, but not like, I don't know. I guess that's more later on in my life that I
Mhm.
did. But I remember going to youth camp one summer, and it was so I grew up in an Assemblies of God Pentecostal church.
Okay.
So pretty charismatic. Like, we didn't do the whole, speaking in tongues and like being slain in the spirit type deal, but it was still very charismatic in its own way.
Okay.
So at this camp, what we did was the pastor had showed us clips of the Passion of the Christ. So we had talked about crucifixion and we had talked about all of the stuff. I mean, he went right for it. Like, he did
Yeah.
not play games.
Don't
He's
play no
like,
games.
yeah.
Yeah.
So, and it was at the time, it was probably the best, I guess, visualization that you could get from something like that.
How,
So
how old were you?
I was 13.
So you see bloody Jesus hanging from a cross, all these lacerations on
Yeah.
thorns. Or isn't a raven like picking at his eye or something like that?
Yeah. Something crazy.
Yeah.
It
Okay.
was very, very intense.
Okay.
Um,
And
but
what did that do for you?
so it helped me to understand really, you know, helped me understand the weight of the gospel and the cost of the gospel. And it also helped me understand, wow, God doesn't just love me like this, He
Mhm.
loves other people like this. And that was really the first time that I had grasped that notion. Because for a while it was just, I grew up around church people. Like, I didn't really have a lot of unsaved people
Hmm.
around me. And
Sure.
so whenever I went into high school and I went into middle school, I had more friends at school and I had more friends that, didn't know that. They didn't know Jesus. And so it was a very new concept to me. But all of a sudden I went from, having these friends, all of my friend group really being at church, to having these people that, they don't know that this is what
Right.
Jesus did for them.
sheltered church girl into culture shock, like all kinds of craziness. Yeah.
Yeah, all kinds of
Okay.
crazy. It was, it was. So that was kind of like my first introduction into the world
Yeah.
through, middle school and high school. And I think that's probably why it was kind of a big turning point in my faith.
Yeah. And so like you saw it as like a reality, or like this was historical, or it put like an image in your brain? Like what specifically did it do for you?
So specifically, yeah, it did. It left an image in my mind of what happened. And, you know, I understand now, like, that's not even scratching the surface of what actually
Yeah.
happened. But it gave me an understanding of, wow, like, this is a real event in history.
Hmm.
And when I read the Bible, this is what really happened.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah.
So where did that take you? Where do you go from there in your spiritual?
So from there, um, around that age, I was involved in mission trips and I was involved in like all this other stuff. Like it helped me get more serious,
Hmm.
I would say, about my faith and
Okay.
about the power of God. Um, I would say probably, and at that point, I didn't have any kind of, I didn't have anything. I feel like I didn't really have anything oppressed. Like I wouldn't say oppressing me, but like I didn't really have any real world issues at the time.
Yeah.
I was in high school. I was, pretty much sheltered
Yeah.
up until that point. And although it was probably around that time that I started getting into more serious relationships with dating and
Mhm.
all of that. And those were the times where I realized if God is not in control, then I'm in serious trouble. Like,
Why did that come? Why did that thought hit you?
so I would say probably around, I would say 17 was probably kind of a rough age in my life,
Hmm.
just because I started dating this guy that was older than me, and I was against everyone that I knew was like, why are you doing this?
Okay.
Like, why are you involved with this person? And he was very, our belief system was different. I don't really think he was a Christian, even though he claimed to be a Christian. There was just a lot of stuff going on there.
Hmm.
Um, and he was very self absorbed, very much into, you know, I don't know, he was just very self absorbed, was a very good way to describe it.
Gotcha.
So much so that he would start kind of criticizing me for my body image, and he would start criticizing me for, my weight, or, the way that I dress, or like things like that. Yeah. It was not a good situation to be in at 17 years old.
Yeah. Your image, your identity is so formulative and stuff. So
Yeah.
what did that do
Yeah.
for your self worth? What did you do for your spirit?
So I would say probably around that age was when I started to kind of, um, I developed a lot of anxiety from that. And it's when I started to kind of try and, I guess, at that moment, like when I was in that relationship, I tried so very hard to change him. And I tried to change the situation, and I tried to control things.
Mm.
I tried to kind of make whatever was happening go away.
How?
And I just, I was just very, I would say things turned really combative,
Mm.
and like we would argue a lot. We would over like really dumb things, really dumb things. Things looking back now, I'm like, should have left him a long time ago. Um,
So why'd you stay?
so I ended up breaking up with him. I was the
Okay.
one that done it.
Gotcha.
But that came after, and I remember in my mind thinking, okay, I'll give him X, Y, and Z amount of time, just 2 more months, 2 more months in this relationship, and things might get better. That was always my thought, was things will get better, things will get better,
Yeah.
things will get better. And they didn't
Yeah.
until I did something about it. But kind of going back to your question of like, what did that do, for my self-image and all of that stuff, it really dug a nail into how I viewed myself and how I, viewed my body and how I viewed, the way that God made me. And kind of, I guess, tying into that, I really struggled with positive, like, I don't want to say positive body image, but just accepting my body image, probably around 12 and 13. That was a weird time for me. Is that weird period of time where like you grow out of the kid clothes?
Yeah.
And you're like in no man's land. Like, you don't know, am I an adult?
What do I do with my life? Yeah.
Like, who am I? What am I doing? So I remember at that period of time, I went to, it was like my first women's conference, that they held. It was the Revolve Girls Conference way back in the day.
Okay.
And I remember that was really the first time that I had heard anything in the Bible mentioning, being fearfully and wonderfully made. And I remember coming home from that weekend and coming home from that moment and that just sticking in my mind. And I, like, looking back now, I really believe that God saw that part of my life coming, and he put people in my life at that time that were constantly, I want to say, constantly like in conflict with what I believed about myself to be true, what I felt. They were constantly speaking the truth over me, even though I didn't.
Yeah, we were always kind of like, get out of here, you don't know what I'm feeling and stuff like that.
Yeah. Being melodramatic, typical teenager stuff. But looking back on it, I was like, that was a really important time to speak up and, tell somebody the truth.
And God is speaking through these people to you, despite how you take it or not.
Yeah. Yes.
So where did that take you from there?
So from there, I would say, so continuing on with my 17, 18-year-old life, after that, I kind of took a hiatus from relationships for a while, probably for about 2, and it wasn't a long hiatus, it was like 2 years.
Yeah. So eternity for like someone at that age.
Yeah, eternity for a long time.
For like an 18-year-old.
Yeah. Okay. So around that time, I met this other boy, and we kind of liked each other, and we kind of were, talking back and forth, and things were like really unclear, but we knew that we liked each other. So it was kind of like, just, I like you, you like me, but we're not doing anything about
we like each other or like each other? Because if
like yeah. So that happened. I was like 18 years old, and it was the first time that someone had told me, I really like you, but God is telling me not to date you. Like, had that whole like situation, right? It was weird. I remember looking back at that, I was like, what?
Because God gives them, because when God speaks to you, it's going to be about dating advice.
Yeah. Yeah. So
all the things to choose, to talk to you about.
Yeah, right. Like, okay.
Yeah.
So, but okay. So looking back at that, like, even though, and I look at that, I'm like, okay, well, if it really was God, then obviously this wouldn't pan out, like this wouldn't work out. Something crazy would happen during that time. So anyway, so we talked about it, and he's, told me, give me the whole spiel. And I'm like devastated, right? Like, this is the first boy that I had liked since going through all the crazy stuff that I went through when I was 17. So and it was weird. It was a weird concept for me. I had no framework to put that in my mind of what do I do when God tells somebody no to do something.
He pulled the card out of his head. I mean, you can't say no to God.
Yeah, like, what is that, So I was very confused. I was pretty heartbroken over it. Like, I just didn't know what to do. I was angry at God. Like,
Yeah.
I had no idea. And that was really the first time that I experienced ever being angry at God. Like,
Hmm.
just because things were so unclear, I was like, why?
Yeah.
Why would you do this? Like, why would you let this happen?
Yeah.
And so over time, and of course, I was constantly thinking, like, what's wrong with me?
Right.
What's wrong with me? Why not me? Like, what's going on? And so it was probably for about a span of maybe 2 to 3 weeks. People that had no idea what was going on, had no clue, like, I was even involved with this person, or like didn't even know who this person was.
Hmm.
Um, we would get into conversations somehow, some way, about the chapter John 15.
Okay.
And I'm not kidding you. Like, it happened over the course of about like 2 to 3 weeks, and like random things. Like, I would go to church services like throughout the week or whatever, and they'd be like, "Guess what we're talking about? John 15." I'm like, did I like miss a meeting somewhere?
Yeah.
Like, what's happening? So I finally read it because I realize I haven't actually read that chapter of the Bible at this point. So I read it and I realize, it's Jesus talking to his disciples.
Hmm.
And, he gets done teaching the crowd, and he kind of is just talking to them. And he gives them the example of, I'm the vine and my Father is the vine dresser, and you are the branches.
Hmm.
And, he who does not abide in me is basically just done. Like, there's nothing you can do. You can't bear fruit
Yep.
if you don't abide in me. And
Mhm.
so he kind of goes through the whole thing of, abide in me, abide in my love. And so I'm like looking at this word, I'm like, okay, this is obviously important. So
Yeah. You're
I
like
need to
trying to
figure out what's
figure
going
out what kind of message are you telling me, God?
Yeah, what's happening?
Yeah.
Like, it
Yeah.
was strange. And I'd never had anything like that happen to me before.
So what did you take away from that?
So I looked it up, and I looked up the word abide, and I realized that one of the definitions, at least English definition, is to make a home in, or to be at home in. And which is the story behind my little tattoo.
Let me see the
um,
tattoo. What's the tattoo of? Describe it to me.
it,
Oh,
it's a little house,
it
and
says,
it says abide
yeah. Gotcha.
on there. So that story will come later, I'm sure. But um, so once I read that definition of the word abide, it kind of opened up my understanding to what this means and what Jesus is talking about. Like, to live in something, it's not just a temporary, you know, one and done type deal. It's, if you're living somewhere, if you're living in something, you're unpacking your bags. Like,
Mhm.
you're unpacking stuff, you're putting paint on the walls, you know, you're making yourself at home
Yeah.
wherever it is that you're abiding in. So, sorry, I have a little notification. Okay. um, so when I read that, and I read it with that understanding, it really is like, regardless of what happens in my life, I understood it as I can make a home here. Like, Jesus, the church, like, this
Mhm.
is my home, regardless of where I go. Like, I'm always welcome here. And it really gave me, at least at that point in life, it gave me a lot of closure. It kind of helped me to stop the wondering of why God did you let this happen, and
Sure.
all of that stuff. And so really from that point on, anytime something crazy happened in my life, I went through a breakup, I went through a transition, I kid you not, in some way, that verse always came up.
Oh,
So it was at that time.
It's kind of like a life verse here. So it gives you like a stability in the middle of like whatever craziness is going on. Like, hey, you still have a home with God,
Yeah.
still have a home with His people. That's
Yeah.
awesome. That's
That's
cool.
exactly what
And then you have the tattoo
yeah,
to solidify it. Cool.
there you go. I don't know.
So you said eventually God saves you
Yeah.
physically, physical life. Well, how did that come out?
So, okay. Well, it leads into the next part of my
Yeah.
life. um, so that relationship ends, right? And about 3 years later, I'm in college. I'm doing my things. I go to Southeastern University in Lakeland.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm away from home, and it's the first time that I've ever been away from home anywhere,
Mm-hmm.
living anywhere anyway. So I'm kind of like, and being in college and like the first time I've ever had to deal with anything like that. So there's a lot of stuff going on in my life at that time. And all of a sudden, I get this text message from the same boy that I had gone through all of this other stuff with, when I was like 18 years old.
Mm-hmm.
And we start talking again. And we start to kind of entertain the idea of getting into a relationship. And all the while, in the back of my mind, there's the conversation of, if God really meant this, or He really spoke to you, or He really didn't want any of
Sure.
that to happen, then obviously I'm gonna be fine.
Yeah.
Like, obviously I can just do whatever the heck I want and the
Yeah.
outcome will be the same anyway. So we dated for like 2 months, and it was probably at that point in my life that I really started struggling with like depression and anxiety because of all of the stuff that, I was away from home, first of all, dealing with this breakup, and dealing with not only a breakup, but also dealing with the fact that I disobeyed God in some way, like thinking in my head,
Mm.
And thinking also that I misheard God, that I
Mm-hmm.
didn't understand Him, or that, you know, I had somehow committed this sin
Right.
that was unforgivable,
Right.
Um, and so I went through probably, and I didn't really realize what was going on in my body up
Mm-hmm.
at that point. But I remember one day thinking to myself, and this was probably a couple weeks after we had broken up. I realized, I was like, I can sleep for like 12 hours
Yeah.
and wake up and not feel a thing.
Mm.
Like, feel like I haven't slept a wink. And I tried to kind of like push it away, push it away, push it away, and just think of it as no big deal. When, first of all, I was going to school to become a psychology major to begin with. So I was really just fooling myself.
Sure.
Um,
So what's
and
depression
so,
and anxiety like? What is it like having that?
so it differs person to person, and it affects your body. I would say, or at least my body, because, all right, so I'm going to get like nerd here, but
Yeah.
so your brain, whenever you have anxiety or whenever you have depression, it produces these certain, it's called chemical pathways in your brain. So when you have depression, or when you have whatever it's caused by, it causes a chemical imbalance in your brain.
Mm-hmm.
So, and over time, as you continue to go on, if you don't seek treatment or if you don't seek help, those chemical pathways, they get ingrained into your brain. And so if your brain is producing these chemicals that are, kind of going through your body is going to respond in
Okay.
some way, shape, or form. So whether that's you get sick all the time, or you get tired all the time, you feel like you have no energy. For me, it was just a culmination of things. Like, I developed allergies, I developed severe fatigue,
Mm-hmm.
and I did have suicidal thoughts for probably the first time in my life, and that was terrifying.
Mm.
So that really developed a lot of anxiety in me too.
Sure.
because I didn't, and it was very strange because I went to a Christian college and mental health and really physical health was not talked about hardly at all unless you were in the classroom.
So you're in this Christian environment, Christian college. Everything should be great at a Christian school,
Yeah.
and internally you're suffering.
Yeah. Yeah. It was probably one of the most lonely experiences of my life, honestly. It
Like,
was the first time that I really didn't feel at home anywhere.
yeah.
And
And this feeling of being at home is super important to you because of everything else. And so
yeah,
you felt like a wanderer and alone
yeah,
in a school where Christians, it's supposed to be like, oh, it's Christians. Like they're all supposed to care and love for you, and
yeah.
you don't feel it.
Yeah, and it was really interesting to me because that was really the first time that I had experienced any kind of interaction with mental health and the church. And
I feel
I
like
remember,
that's a very untapped thing, untalked about, untapped thing, like
yeah,
mental health, because a lot of people just write it off.
yeah,
And then if you
yeah,
write it off, that's like the worst thing you can do for someone who's like suffering from mental health. It's like,
yeah, yeah.
yeah.
It really is. And I do remember this one time I was on campus and a friend of mine, he's someone that I had just kind of, I feel like when I was going through that, I
Mhm.
saw people that, I saw people, I guess, in a way that a lot of other people didn't, you know, because I feel like whenever you are going through something like that, whenever you're going through depression or you're going through anxiety, you can easily recognize it, excuse me, in other people.
Mhm.
Um, and so there was one time I was on campus and one of my friends, we were just talking, and I remember he looked at me and he said something along the lines of, I see what you're doing. Like, I see what you're going through. Or, no. I remember what he said. I was, we were in the cafeteria and we were having lunch, like a group of us together. And he was really the only one that knew anything about what was going on at the time. He was one of the first people I told. And I had told him, whenever I had gone through that really awful breakup, I told him that I just screamed. Really, I just screamed the whole way home because I was so just distraught with everything. It was kind of like the hay, or not the hay, oh my gosh, the straw that broke the camel's back.
Yeah.
Um, and so I remember like telling him about that experience,
Mhm.
and inside, I just had there was so much anxiety going on inside me still. And I remember everyone got up and they left and they cleaned out, their plates or whatever. And he just looked at me and he said, I can still see the screaming that's going on. And that was the first time that I had felt not alone um, in that environment because someone wasn't afraid to talk to me about what I was going through.
So sometimes, like for the best thing for you was just acknowledgement, not even
Yes.
fixing, just acknowledging that, yeah, you are in pain and you are suffering.
Yeah.
And
And go ahead.
you felt like before that, no one acknowledged it. No one even knew.
Yeah. And it was just this I guess I felt afraid that, people would know or people would find out. And I was afraid of what they would think of me. And
Why?
so it was a very shameful, I guess,
Mm,
experience because, here I am on this Christian campus, church girl, grew up in church, grew up with this pretty
sure.
much a golden childhood. Like
Yeah.
everything was great. And being a psychology major on top of it all, like what were people going to think of me if I struggled with depression and
Sure.
anxiety?
Sure. And it's
Um,
not even like if you're a Christian, everything's good. God's got you and done you blessings and you're saved. Like there's no reason for you to suffer mentally. And that's why you felt like you had to hide it.
yeah, yeah, it really, really, yes,
So when someone says something, I see you screaming, it's kind of like a release. Like
yeah,
finally someone sees me.
yeah. Like I'm gonna be okay because
Yeah.
someone's got their eyes on
Yeah.
me.
And not it's not necessarily that someone, your friend, has to tell you some magic line or word,
Yeah.
but just recognizes that what you're going through.
Yeah. And looking back on that experience, I totally believe that that was God, placing that person in my life to kind of just help me see, like, you're not alone. And so around that time, I really did experience a lot of anger with God, and being at a Christian college. And I remember there was one night I was in the girls' bathroom, and obviously it's a Christian college, so they have Bible verses posted everywhere. We had a verse of the month, right? Like
right over the toilet, right over the.
It was literally right over the toilet. I don't know. They do weird stuff like that. So,
God is always with you.
thanks.
A weird
Thank you for
verse.
that reminder in the bathroom. Great.
Yeah.
So I remember it was April, and April's verse of the month was Isaiah 40, and it was the verse that said, those who wait on the Lord shall renew their strength, and they shall rise up on wings like eagles. And I remember reading that, and for the first time, really ever in my life, thinking to myself, that's not true. Like, that's not, if that's true, then I shouldn't be going through any of this. Like, I shouldn't be, feeling this way every day when I wake up, feeling like I should just go back to bed, or feeling like, going to sleep every night, having those thoughts of, I don't want to wake up in the morning. Why, thinking to myself, why am I experiencing that if this is true, if this is a promise of God? And I, like, it was the first time that I ever had, like, an angry prayer of just asking God, why? Like, why is this a thing? Why is this happening to me?
Yeah.
Why are you, if you're all good and you're all powerful, why are you letting this happen?
Yeah.
And
it's nothing like externally, right? It's just internal.
Yeah,
and
it
you're
was
like,
all internal.
this could easily be just plucked from me.
Yeah, exactly. And I remember, there was no kind of magical transformation that happened in the girls' bathroom stall. Like, I wish I could tell people, like, oh, there was some magical, like, I got chills and, boom, depression was gone.
Sure.
But that's not how that worked at all. It was a long process of finally admitting to myself. I remember there was one night I was driving back home. I was driving back to school from home. And this is probably when I was about 20, 21, 22, somewhere around there. So I had been struggling with this for at least 2 years at this point, off and on. And I remember thinking to myself, like, it had to be God, because there was no way in my frame of mind that I could have conjured up this thought. Because I remember, like, I would go through periods where everything was great and everything, was, it felt normal. Everything was, weight was lifted off my shoulders and whatever. And looking back on it, I really do feel like, at least at those moments of experiencing depression, it really was the enemy just attacking my mind, like, constantly. Because I just had thoughts of not wanting to live anymore.
Sure.
And I didn't understand where it was coming from. I was like, this is not, and that's what I realized. I was like, this is not coming from me. Like, this is not just, it's not in my character. It's not like in something that I would normally do. So I remember having that and feeling so much shame and feeling so much like I shouldn't be struggling with this. I shouldn't be, going through this. I shouldn't be, doing all this stuff. Like, I'm reading my Bible, I'm praying, I'm doing all of this great stuff.
You're
Like,
checking off all the boxes.
Yeah. Like, I shouldn't be doing all that.
So what did that do for your faith and your belief in God?
Oh my gosh. It really, really messed me up for a while. And I remember that night driving back home or driving back to school, I had this really clear thought in like the midst of all of this chaos going on in my mind of a lie is just as powerful as any kind of power that you give it. So it's not powerful if you don't give it any power, if you don't believe it. And for the first time since struggling with that, I realized that that is what depression is. That's what depression and anxiety are. It's the result of believing some kind of lie about yourself and or about God in this case, because that's really what it came from.
Sure.
So how
did you get out of it?
So that was really the first kind of, I would say, break in the clouds in my mind at that point. And the second step for me was to just admit it to myself, is this is where I'm at. I have depression. Like, I have this thing that I was so afraid of having and so
Was it hard?
afraid of going through. It was really scary.
Yeah.
It was really scary. Even just having that thought and like thinking I have depression.
I could hear it in your voice. It's hard. It's like hard to admit or something.
It is hard. It was a very difficult experience because, and then I realized I was like, if I can't admit this to myself, I'm not going to be able to get help. I'm not going to be able to, get out of it. And once I acknowledged that, it was like, it really was, it was a game changer for me. Because from that point on, I realized I was like, okay, well, if this is true and I have this thing, then that means that there are other people out there that are like me and I'm not alone, which is the biggest lie that I believed.
Yeah.
Continuously, fed that was I'm alone, and I'm not alone.
Yeah.
And so through that process and understanding, who God is and who he's kind of placed in my life and what he's done in my life from that point on is just a kind of reminding me constantly, you are not alone. You were never alone.
Yeah.
Never alone. Even when you felt alone, you were never alone.
Yeah.
And
that does a lot for a Christian, like it's like, especially if you're struggling like that, to me is almost really big aspects of hell, right? To be separated, to be alone.
Yeah.
And depression is that in the mind.
Yeah. And it was really difficult for me as well, because being in a Christian college and being surrounded by scripture and being surrounded by, all of these things, what happened for me was, or the way that I experienced it was, there was a twisting of scripture. There was a twisting of understanding. And for the longest time, I did have this thought in my mind of, well, God is sovereign. Like, if I end my life, like, obviously he ordained it. Like, which is, looking back on it, I'm like, that's what crazy people like. I was a crazy person. I was one of them. And I remember that was such a dark thing in my life to believe that. And it was,
God's okay with you ending your life. And
because it reflected that I believed, number one, that my life was not valued by God and that it wasn't worth valuing by God. And I remember at the time I was reading through, Psalm 119. And there was a verse in Psalm 119. I can't remember exactly where it's at because there's a lot in there. But there was a verse that had said something along the lines of, your word is for my life. And your commands are for my life. They're life-giving.
Yeah.
And that completely just decimated that lie that I had believed. Yeah. Which is interesting because that's what was being twisted around in my mind. So for me, like, I knew in that moment that was God. That had to be God, because I was using God's word against myself. So he had to be the one to use it to save me.
Sure.
And that was huge.
So
That was
what would you
huge.
so if that's how you propelled out of it, right? If God, that's how God sewing you out, it's like scripture, right? Just soaking in scripture and praying that God will speak through the words to get to you and to destroy any lies. What's your advice to someone who's suffering from depression, anxiety, a Christian that doesn't feel like anyone understands about give me some advice for them if they're listening here.
Well, first I would have to say that you're not alone. Like I said, you were never alone. There are Christians, there are sound, and that was something that I really had to wrap my brain around too. Was there are people in the Bible that Scripture mentions that suffered with depression or suffered with it,
Sure.
that suffered with anxiety. Just because you have this thing in your life does not make you doesn't make God incapable of still bringing glory to himself through you. And that is another thing too, is a lot of times depression comes from a lack of purpose or not believing that you have purpose or that you're needed.
You're
And
useless
yeah,
and not worth anyone's, anything.
yeah. And so for me, that was so helpful. It was so helpful to have people that I admired, that I looked up to share their story of their own struggles.
Oh, like testimonies.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Nice.
It did, because it shows you that you aren't alone. Like it is a fact. You're not alone.
Yeah.
And
It's like the message you're trying to get through someone who feels like they're alone.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And so also it helped me understand, because when I struggled with depression, like the biggest moments that I struggled with depression, it was always paired with anxiety because I didn't know how to handle my own thoughts and feelings. Like I felt it's an like unusual sensation to feel overwhelmed by what you're feeling and overwhelmed by what you're thinking and feeling like you just don't trust yourself at that point. You don't trust the things that are going on inside you. And if you've never experienced that, it can be really scary. It can be really
Sure.
so what helped me kind of through that, and what still helps me to today, is just talking to people. When I feel alone, or when I feel that that lie kind of trying to take root back in my life, I have to reach out to somebody,
Yeah.
and I have to just tell them what's going on.
It creeps back in, and then you got
Yeah.
to like continually use God's people to like fend that off and stuff like that. God works in His people.
Yeah.
Do you have any advice? Got two more questions here. We're running up on time, but the first question is: do you have any advice for people who are on the outside of someone who's suffering from depression? Like, say, advice from you. You just gave advice for someone in depression, and anxiety. But what about me, who I'm not struggling, but maybe my friend does?
Right.
What should I do?
I would say, well, also, there was one really important thing I had to mention for the question before that.
Sure. Sorry.
Don't be afraid to get therapy. Don't.
Mm,
It's not a dirty word
yeah.
in Christianity.
Oh,
It's
that's
not
so
a dirty
important.
word in the church. Right. Don't be
Super
afraid.
important. Getting professional help, therapeutic. Yeah, that's super, super important.
Yeah. So moving and transitioning on from that.
Yeah.
I would say, I mean, like I said before, it varies person to person. Everyone experiences that differently, but I do know the biggest thing for myself, and from what I understand from other people going through depression, is you have this fear of not wanting to be alone and not wanting to feel alone.
Mhm.
Being alone physically is not helpful. So whenever someone is going through depression, or if you have a friend that's going through depression, just be there for them. Just physically as much as possible.
Bodily be there around them.
Be there or check in on them, with a text if you can't do that. It really is as simple as just reaching out to people and checking in.
What if they deny me? What if they say they ignore my texts or whatever? That could get frustrating for me, right?
Yeah, and that happens with people that have depression. They don't always reach back out to other people, especially if they feel isolated or if they feel alone or if they're coping with that way.
Yeah, maybe they want to be wanted, but they don't want to be around them, but they just, people play that game, right? Especially you're caught in this lie. What do I do if someone keeps denying me?
I would say keep at it.
I know myself. I'm sinful, right? I know myself. I'm gonna be like, fine, yeah. Suffer yourself. You know what I mean? I've been there for you, and then I'll write off all the times that I was there for them, and say, look how many times I've been there for you.
Yeah.
And I'll get mad, and that's what really happens, and then that causes more distance.
Yeah, that is very, very true. That's very, very true. I think like, I guess the parting advice or wisdom that I would kind of share with someone is realize that what that person is doing is not about you. Like, it's not about.
That's great.
Something that you did.
That's great advice.
Yeah. It's not about what it's because sometimes they have, anxiety or they have depression and all that stuff, and they don't want to reach back out to people.
Yeah.
But by you continuously doing that, and by you continuously reaching out to them and continuously kind of just trying to be there for them in any way that you can.
Yeah.
It really does help combat that lie that they're alone, because clearly they're not. You're annoying them.
Yeah, man, that's what I'm saying. And that's a true story, man. I'm only saying that from like some experience here. I don't know, and I'm not one to like. Maybe I'll hit depression, or maybe I'll suffer from that. That's not my struggle. Yeah. And knowing myself, I don't see, honestly, I do not see how that like attacks someone, but I can see the effects on them. So I recognize something's happening. I just don't think it's my struggle. Yeah. So like I'm so mentally, technically detached from that. I'm like, I don't understand. I try to reach out to them 1, 2, 3 every day, and they shut me down. I'm like, well, fine.
Yeah.
But that's so key to say, like, it's not about me, like that's not about, like, it's not their anxiety or their pushing back is not what I did or what I didn't do. It's just what they're going through at the time. And I think that's super helpful. I wish I knew that. I wish I did too earlier on in my life. Yeah. But also, I mean, obviously, like, it's the churchy answer to say, but really do pray for them. Because just knowing and let them know, like, even if they don't respond to you or even if they don't look at your text or whatever, let them know I'm praying for you. Because just knowing that somebody is praying for me or is appealing to God on my behalf, again, kind of combats that lie. Sure. That I'm really not alone. Sure.
And I would say, I mean, for people that are looking to kind of, get out of depression and get out of that rut, take some time to learn about yourself, learn about your triggers, learn about your, what kind of brings that on, because depression does not just happen overnight. It's always caused by something. It's always caused by, thoughts or like anxiety or whatever. Ask God to reveal those things to you, and He will.
That's great.
Yeah.
Do you have any parting words for us? Words of wisdom? Anything like any last advice? Anything you left out?
Oh boy.
Otherwise, I got one last question for you.
Okay. Maybe. I don't know.
Well, before I ask it, I just want to let everyone know. Thank you if you reached the end of this episode. We really want to thank you. This is something that honestly is true to my heart, really close to my heart. I really feel I have a lot of empathy for someone who struggles by themselves, who doesn't have any relationships or thinks they don't have any relationships. It's still the same hell. Loneliness is a special kind of hell. That it's like if you're dealing with something it's bad. But then if you're dealing with something and you're alone, it's even worse. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, and so it's a
Yeah.
certain type of hell, and it's reflected in the separation of God, right? Loneliness and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And God saves us into community, community, community. So that's for one. If you guys know anyone who's listening here, if you guys know anyone who's suffering for depression, please listen back to this testimony and do your own research. Read some books or something. I'm not sure,
Yeah.
but um, yeah, really, and pray and all the stuff that Kaylee said. I mean, it's all like firsthand experience. But thank you for listening. We want to thank everyone who supported, all the supporters, everyone who's in the group, the Fringe Network, all that stuff. Anyway, I gotta say thanks to everybody. Let's wrap this thing up,
Okay.
Kaylee. Why do you think God is awesome?
Oh my gosh. Wow. Well, I think God is awesome because he saved me when I was completely useless to him, when I could do nothing for him. Um, and he didn't just, that's through Jesus, but he didn't just save me that one time. He didn't just save me for eternal life, like one event, one and done, which he totally had right to do.
Yeah,
And he was totally, totally just for just that one event,
yeah,
of Jesus dying on the cross. But I think God is awesome because he's continuously proven himself to me over and over and over again by saving my life multiple times.
yeah.
And he's awesome because he has used something that I've tried to hurt myself with to save me.
Wow,
And only he can do that.
that's awesome. That's awesome. Thank you guys for listening. Thanks for being here, and Kaylee, thank you so much for being part of this podcast.
Oh, thanks. It was fun.
Yeah. Well, we love you all, guys. Thanks for listening, and we will see you guys in the next episode.
Awesome.